couple things I'd like to remind you again. Yeah, these are the new materials I uploaded already. Hope by now you should also have received my course announcement, which I sent out earlier this afternoon. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you find the PowerPoint. You find a new reading. Yeah, this reading will partly be covered in the PowerPoint too. So, yes, for our tutorial this week, as I mentioned earlier, this time, well, since we could not meet face to face, so the only chance we could do would be use the same tactic we use for earlier tutorials, which will require you to create a very short feedback to Thomas Pynchon entropy. This is a story I assigned last week from here, and I think all you have to do, if we look at the instructions. Yeah, I think the questions will be here. So based on your reading of Thomas Pynchon entropy from the previous module, write a short response around 200 words. Yeah, so just one paragraph or two. So you may address the following questions. What's the meaning of narrative order? Well, you sounds like there's no order in the narrative. Very good. Like I mentioned earlier. Okay, you supported something. Ready. Okay, second question will be, you can apply Ricoeur's idea of narrative time, which came from the reading from the previous module. So how does it tell us, like, okay, what exactly is the temporal experience of modernity? So many things I'm sure you can talk about. Yeah, I mean, how these characters interact with one another in the stories, or do they actually need certain interaction among themselves, or do you feel like there's a very strong sense between the ongoing of time as well as the ongoing of the actions of these people, or do you feel them like totally alienated from one another? So these are some of the key questions that you may address based on your own personal reading of this particular story. Yeah. If you want to know a little bit more background, I think this is qualified as a masterpiece of yeah, sometimes I don't want to use the word masterpiece, but yeah, a masterpiece of postmodern short story. Yeah, so if that's your cup of tea, you may text me and then I can give you more. Yeah, if you really like a traditional person, then I think you may need some more time to see what has been going on in this story. But anyway, it gives us a very good basis for us to think carefully about time and narration and how these two things would interact with one another. Because, yeah, no matter we like it or not, time and narration seems to go hand in hand together. So sometimes they're very good friends, sometimes they become enemies. So based on your reading of entropy, you can tell us whether or not you see time and narration as good friends in the story, or time as narration as some sort of rivals in this particular postmodern masterpiece, if you like to call it this way. Okay, so that being said, I may carry on with where am I? Yes. Give me a second, please. I'll make sure, like, okay. Good, then we can go back to the PowerPoint. Yeah. Last lesson, we work on narrative time. Yeah, from the previous video, which I uploaded to YouTube already. Yeah, we work on narrative time. We look at modern time. So a couple things we know by now. Time is more than one. Okay. So if you're still more like obsessed with our so-called mechanical time, or obsessed with our idea of temporal linearity, I think time to let go for a while. Because if you obsess too much with them, you may have difficulty understanding the rest of them. Okay. So earlier from the previous video, we know like it used to be like the religious dimension has somehow dominated time, or our understanding of time for a very long period, especially from a more Western context. That seems to be the case. And now, with the disappearance, no offense to those who believe in God and so, or any higher being around you, okay, or to any friends here who are religious, with the disappearance of God as one of the key determinant of time telling, or as a key determinant in telling us the meaning of time, now you notice we have to pick up different bases, okay, for us to make sense of time again. So this is how we should understand the so-called multiplicity of time. Multiplicity means like there are different types and different kinds of people, different kinds of groups. Okay, likely maybe we use different bases to measure time, to experience time, to understand time, and then to put them nicely or consistently with their cravings for narrative. Again, narrative, not necessarily, from now on, the narrative not necessarily has to be linear. Okay, even though many stories we read, okay, many movies we have watched, many of them, especially blockbusters, yeah, Hollywood kind of film, you notice, or major productions one. Normally they stick to the same thing. Otherwise, people would have difficulty understanding them. And that may not be too good for the market. But that being said, we know time is more than one. And therefore now we have different ways to measure it, different ways to justify our experience with it. So in this PowerPoint, there are 3 more kinds of time that I would like to highlight for you. So again, the key question still remains the same. I think that's from the previous video too. Now we know time narration, 2 sides of the same coin. So partly because, like, as I put down here, a more specific conception of the former, which will be time, may certainly dictate the perception of the latter, which will be narration, which means these 2 things cannot be truly separated. Even though throughout the development of literature, film, or but with different kinds of schools, theories, authorship, on and on, up to a certain point we notice, well, if some of you like very experimental kind of film, very experimental kind of literature, avant-garde, those kinds of things, then I'm sure you know a little bit better. But let's try not to jump to that extreme first, because there could be many examples, and I try not to confuse you by now. But no matter how hard like these people try, at the end, time and narration both seem not to be able to be separated. Even on the one hand, we have many different kinds of time or different kinds of temporal experiences. Also, correspondingly, we also have different forms of narration that seems to cater for this particular urge for temporal diversity or temporal multiplicity, see which way you like to call it. So therefore, we know time is manifested through narration, whereas narration is modeled upon our understanding of time. That's why, okay, based on this particular, how to say, thesis, okay, let's look at 3 more different kinds of time. Okay, now we know God is gone. We can't use the church, we can't use religious institution to buy time together. So you notice one interesting thing, moving from the so-called religious time to secular time, which we explained briefly in the previous video. From religious time to secular time, you notice one interesting thing will be time. What is it at the end? Time is a kind of collective understanding. Time has to be a kind of even collective identity. How to say, for instance, now we are looking at different countries. Of course, you may talk about their culture. You may talk about hotels, well, landmarks, tourist spots, products, souvenirs, up to you. There are so many different ways to tell time. To tell the differences or to create the differences between one place and another. And one key important element will be even time itself, okay, the time lag between one place and another, the time lag between one country, okay, over another, okay, that seems to be another interesting element that we take it very naturally up in a certain way, true, because of GMT and so, but if you, should I go that far? If you like to look into how GMT is being devised, GMT stands for Greenwich Mean Time. GMT was very much devised, implemented actually alongside the development of, well, not development, I don't know what term I should use, alongside the spread, or the more popular term, the outbreak of colonialism, especially the building of the so-called British Empire. Don't forget, GMT 0 began from London, and then they use a more scientific name, okay, to sort of mark off the differences, okay, of different parts of the world. But then the whole thing began from London, and then all the way through the world. So each and every one of them, well, yes, you may argue, if some of you are well trained in natural science, I dare not to debate with you. But then up to a certain point, we also notice, okay, many so-called natural sciences, right from the initial stage, I can't say they are not politically motivated. Yes. So even the so-called division of GMT, okay, all the way through the world, okay, is one good example to how, okay, it's a so-called how we use time as a way to consolidate our collective identity, and how we use time as a way to mark off the differences between us and other people including other people in a different country, or people of different races, on and on together. And even once, many years ago, I mean, during the heyday of colonialism, time telling was being seen as a very civilized means of behavior, as compared to the savages, as compared to the so-called uncivilized indigenous people, okay, like they swept through South America, okay, on and on together. So those were a way to sort of like, so being able to tell time, or having all these mechanical means to help you to tell time, was seen as a very important landmark of civilization, as compared to the so-called the savage, the native people, the indigenous people, okay, from the perspective of the colonist. Yeah. So that being said, we now, from there, we can move on to the so-called national time. Okay. Yeah, just on the sideline, if some of you like to read Joseph Conrad. Anyone like Joseph Conrad? Yeah, the writer of Heart of Darkness. He also wrote one called The Secret Agent, and The Secret Agent was an interesting story about the bombing of the observatory. Okay, especially that marks off the beginning of GMT. And this secret agent wants to bomb, okay, a time-telling, a global time-telling mechanism, because by doing so, he believed, okay, that could really brings the end to colonialism. That could really bring us all back to restore so-called equality, to restore so-called freedom, okay, among people in the world. Okay, is that, well, if you're interested, then take a look at that book, because it just popped up in my mind concerning GMT, the bombing of a global time-telling implementation, and Joseph Conrad. Yeah, they're one of my favorite writers. Okay. All right, let's come back here. National time, okay, quite interesting enough. Yeah, these days when we tell time, how do we notice that? Because if you look into a calendar, that you could expand a little bit further in terms of, say, all these celebrations, ceremonies, all these festivals we are having. Okay, now that could broadly included under the so-called national time, or even the national calendar. If we notice our calendar, you like it or not, okay, we celebrate Chinese New Year, even though like that also marks the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak. Well, we had some celebration, did we? Before the class suspension began. Anyway, so from all these different means of celebration, anniversaries, okay, now these are ways to sort of like, okay, bind us all together, give us a sense of solidarity. Well, I hope. Yeah, so the calendar is one of them. And another way would be, now we notice like the so-called, one of the most easiest and even handy conception of time in our modern world would be the so-called modern nation state. Okay, which book gave us the best overview of this particular idea? Okay, this one. From Benedict Anderson, Imagine Communities. Maybe some of you have read it, or those of you who haven't read it, I strongly recommend you take a look at this book. Easy to read, not too thick, and quite fun, to be honest. I mean, if you're interested in nationalism and how they use time and even printing as a way to sort of like keep inventing a so-called national identity for all of us. Okay, so what happened in this book would be like, in this book, Benedict Anderson argues that the so-called development of nationalism and the so-called consolidation of national belonging start beginning from the 18th century was fairly much dependent upon a new form of understanding of time. And here, so-called like temporal modernity, which we briefly explained in the previous video, abstraction from humanity, which is a very key thing, because no matter we like it or not, the clock is still ticking. Yes, that's one of the understanding of what we call abstraction from humanity. It's not because I feel good, then time flows faster. I feel bad, then time flows slower. Now, that's a very emotional understanding of time. If you feel good, that's always like you have a good party and then you're with good friends. Okay, a good ambience, then you know time flies faster. Okay, if you're having a little gathering with boring people and then the ambience is all wrong, the food is terrible, the drink is tasteless, that kind of gathering, you know, time flows slower. Now, this is a more emotional, psychological understanding of time. But back to the basic, no matter we like it or not, the clock is still ticking, right? So that's one way to understand why so-called modern temporal understanding concerns abstraction from humanity. And that also makes us feel a little bit so-called disembodiment, and on together. And most likely you start to see time has been being appropriated for other cultural or political advances together. And it seems nationalism is being one of the key ways, okay, to help us sort of reconfigure and re-understand what time really means. So that's a very interesting definition. So I just simply quoted all here from Anderson's book. How does he see nations and time? Okay, so nation is a sociological organism moving calendarically through homogeneous empty time. Okay, this is a very important concept. Time is homogeneous, time is empty, unless we pinch it upon the development of a nation. Now, that would be a different story. Otherwise, because time has been totally abstracted from our religious belief, abstracted from our day-to-day routines, okay, even abstract from our feelings about it. Feelings and time totally irrelevant in our modern days world. Yeah, you can simply, I just gave you a good example. Like sooner or later when you get a job, you can tell your boss, I don't feel good, so that I come back to work later. No, you can't. Okay, 9 a.m. is 9 a.m. Be there. So the 9 a.m. exists beyond your feelings, as well as your board's feelings. So that thing has been completely detached, okay, from us. So it becomes a kind of rule for us to follow. So that's why they call it homogeneous empty time. And partly, okay, also being seen as a solid community moving steadily down or up history. Now, so time can be homogeneous and empty, unless, how do we make it not homogeneous? How do we make it more solid? Unless, according to Benedict Anderson, we pinch it upon the development of the nation. So that's why everything from the past can be glorified, and in the future, of course, will be even more glorious. You can't, if you still don't understand, go to whatever given national museum. Okay, that kind of narration. If you're interested, go take a look. I'm not so sure if I should recommend you to go to. No, we can't. The History Museum shut down in Hong Kong. Yeah. I still think of the Hong Kong story. I think I mentioned that to some of you in the first lesson. I mean, that's permanent exhibition in the History Museum of Hong Kong, but yeah, I don't know how to tell you. Anyway, if you've been to any given national museum, so the past, something very nice, and then from the past, it keeps dragging us up to a certain point, okay, of the present, okay, something for us to celebrate, and then the future must be highly positive. If you can find one country, one national museum that do not do the same, please let me know. I'll be very interested to go. Impossible. Now, these time will become, how do we understand, a grand narrative scheme of a nation. Okay, if we do that, time will no longer be homogeneous and empty because the time has been so-called, quote unquote, nationalized in a way. And by nationalizing time, what are we actually doing? We are also blending it with a very important narrative scheme. Okay, we also, while nationalizing time, we are also nationalizing narrative. Yes. That's why typical national museum, if you go to any one of them, I don't care if it's in Asia, Europe, whatever, they may begin from a very distant spots, and the parts are all fairly much the same. Start talking about rocks, dinosaurs, okay, people living in caves. It seems like they are all more or less the same, unless they get closer and closer to the contemporary, to the modern world. Okay, then they start to articulate the differences. Now, this is the so-called homogeneous empty time, but then now having gained a certain national meaning. And of course, the meaning must be positive, must be glorious. If you could find one national museum that gives us a very bleak future of that country, please let me know. Very critical, this museum. But I doubt they would get any funding from the government. Okay, that's being said. Okay, so we also know now that's how we understand time. And other way, okay, why he mentioned print capitalism? Because by you and I, we don't know each other. So according to Benedict Anderson, that was also a time when the print culture was getting very, very popular in Europe. Now, the example was in Europe. So with that, we see two things, the novel and then the newspaper. Because you and I, we don't know each other, but then we assume we know each other very well because we read more or less the same thing. Newspaper bind us all together, even though nowadays you may argue it is the media that split us off. Okay, some of you buy one side of political stance, likely you have your own chosen media options. Okay, those who do not buy with you, likely they have their own different media options. Now it seems like we more like split up with different media options, okay, or with different media products. Okay, even you can call them products. But many years ago, okay, I mean back to Anderson's idea of print capitalism, those were the things that have to unite a group of strangers. Because normally, and it's not anyone in the country, okay, even though you like it so much, you know the places very well, that doesn't mean like you know everybody. Impossible. Okay, so big, so far, so many strangers. How do we feel united? We shared common knowledge about current affairs. We also share common knowledge about the so-called narrative together. So what are newspaper and novel? Okay, up to a certain point. Okay, some of you may disagree with me by saying, well, this one is literary, this one is non-literary. But deep side, you also know these two things, they do have something in common. Narration. Newspaper stories are narration. Novels, narration. So that's why print capitalism, something becomes like products of narration that Anderson believe, okay, that help to sustain or that helps to nurture a so-called national identity back then. Okay, how do we sense that? Okay, the keyword will be here, simultaneity. Newspaper, simultaneous, right? Okay, today's newspaper, we assume you read it, I've read it. Okay, of course, these days we may go online, but then likely the stories we see, well, the perspective can be very, very different. I agree, but then the information we share, I think, will be more or less the same on the same day. So even like simply by asking you today, what's the big news? I think some of you could possibly tell me like it would be a dispute between China and USA concerning the name of the virus, and then on, and then what's going on in Hong Kong. Okay, we start to block off all new travelers. Okay, they have to go through compulsory or mandatory medical supervision or quarantine, on and on. Now, these are more or less the same amount of information we get it. So we do share a sense of simultaneity. Now, don't forget simultaneity is a kind of time too. Okay, so at the same time, of course, back then, how do we take a further step from more mechanical or even dehumanized one? We share the same clock. We also share the same calendar. The last two things, okay, most likely, you like it or not, totally out of our control, totally out of our preference, and totally out of our strength. Okay, if you choose not to adopt the same clock and then the same calendar. So these two things, by and large, it looks like very neutral, very natural time-telling devices or institutions, but deep side, these tools are very powerful mechanism in sort of like regulating our self-understanding, as well as helping the so-called the national institution to bind the people together. Yes. So partly, okay, to understand that also help us to create a certain nationalist imaginary. Okay, it's like more from on and on, like partly from the novels. Okay, they notice like by reading the so-called the realist novel, I mean from a more European context. Okay, they notice what life would be like from different classes of the people, and because of that, okay, likely it shows like how different happenings could possibly pops up, okay, occurring within a single or universalized time frame. Yes. So those were the days, okay, with the advent of the so-called realist novel, which they narrate, okay, day-to-day routines, lives, okay, of different kinds of people within the same time-space compression. So therefore, we notice, okay, that was the time, okay, how narrative was being used, okay, to make time meaningful and to make time national together. Of course, here comes another different ideas, okay, from Homi Bhabha. If some of you like post-colonialism, I'm sure you have heard of him. Okay, being one of the most prominent post-colonial critic himself. Okay, he questioned, like, especially using post-colonial theory. Homi Bhabha questions, okay, Anderson, like, most of the cases, it seems like true, it is imperative to question theories of the horizontal, homogeneous, empty time of the national narrative, because under the so-called national narrative, but then the key question is, whose nation are we talking about? Okay, so what Bhabha sees so-called a simultaneous time would be, okay, it just simply produces drastically uneven and unequal ways in which different communities are allowed into. And even worst case scenario, excluded from national belonging and legal citizenship. Yes, quite true in a way, even though we believe there's a certain single universal time, but then, well, those who fit in likely would be so-called the ruling class, the upper class, or for us, the so-called the middle upper class, on and on. Those people with resources, with power, those people that are more like at the center of the community. But how about those having marginalized? Okay, having marginalized, okay, those people who are not so resourceful, okay, how could they possibly feel or sense the same thing that is being shared by the so-called certain groups of people within a certain national community? Now, that's the question Bhabha raised here. So as a solution, okay, Bhabha argues, okay, we should have the so-called a double time. Or even nowadays, okay, if you follow post-colonial theory very close, okay, we don't even have double time, we have multiple times. For instance, okay, like, do we have to subsum, okay, or to subcount ourselves all under so-called single unified narrative of the nation. Okay, yes and no. Now I leave that to you. But when Baba raises the idea of double time, well, the question is like, most likely is we have to also consider the so-called minority discourse. Minority discourses here would be those who may not be within the dominant race, those people who may not speak our language, or those people are being so-called like marginalized, okay, in our way of life. Okay, now those stories or those narratives, okay, we should also consider because they also represent a totally different form of temporal experience, even though they take place within the same national umbrella or the same communal umbrella around us. Okay, right. The second form of time concerns natural time. If some of you like, I'm not so sure if you heard of the concept Anthropocene, kind of big these days in cultural theories or cultural studies or even literary studies. Now we have so many things called about earth writing, land writing. Some goes to study trees instead of just looking into writings, okay, of humankind. Okay, so if you understand those things like yeah, land writing, eco-criticism, we call that, yeah, Anthropocene is one, eco-criticism is another, which are new, not really new, fairly popular these days, using environmentalism as a way to question culture, okay, including literature, as well as other kinds of artistic principles. Anyway, so here I just briefly let you know a little bit because partly I'm not a scientist. Okay, so I just highlight those part I think I'm comfortable to share with you. If some of you are more schooled in natural science, I'm sure you could share more with us, okay, later on through your paper or through your blog writing. Yeah, please feel free to do so. Okay, so yes, we cannot ignore the fact that like time, our understanding of time, okay, even though it's not truly natural, but then still natural and physical science helped us a lot to understand it. Even back in 1687, okay, Isaac Newton, the very famous physicist, okay, he called like absolute true and mathematical time. Okay, so that is something quite echoing the coming of the modern age, because by looking into that, you know that it really like overlaps with the conception of modern time, which is detached, depersonalized, and again, just like I told you, no matter you like it or not, time is still clicking in this way. So that is, and for most of the time, we also know it is something measurable together. So like, so time flows, according to Isaac Newton, equally without relation to anything external. You start to see that science somehow replace God or replace other kinds of so-called religious beliefs, okay, in our time-telling experience or in our, yeah, or in our temporal experience. So because it's nothing external, time itself becomes a detached, okay, autonomous unit by itself, okay, based on natural science. Okay. To even in Newtonian universe, which is another like very prominent physicist, time is considered to be universal and unchanging. So sometimes they even call it the absolute time, or some call it the deep time. Another way, like yeah. So at the same time, you notice, okay, it is somehow parallel the development of universal time in European modernity, which I've just briefly explained to you. So with the naturalization of progressive time, okay, likely it also helps us to link with the discipline of anthropology. Now, some of you school in anthropology, again here, no offense, but if you look back in the historical background, anthropology, okay, start popping up also during the time of colonialism, or the so-called, well, the age of discovery, because they realized, okay, from that Eurocentric idea, they realized there exists other kinds of people, other kinds of behavior, totally different from theirs, okay, and therefore they start like they have the need to study different kinds of communities, okay, that may not be Christian, that may not be patriarchal. So even from food, from behavior, from the idea of courtesy, languages, okay, all these would goes under anthropology, only because they realize they are not the only people on Earth. There were other people around them. But still, that being said, if you look into the idea of progressive time, most of the cases, okay, they believe, okay, when they go and study these people, they are at the forefront of the so-called progressive time, while these people are always at the back, lacking behind. Okay, if you pay attention to the first video, which I've briefly highlighted the point, okay, one just important political justification of colonialism, and that has something to do with time, will be normally as a colonist, they see themselves as being more advanced technologically, and even in terms of time, they're at the forefront. And those people who are behind them, okay, who lacks proper technology, who eats differently, who speaks differently, okay, or even they behave differently, they will be branded as being regressive, okay, as compared to the timeline of the colonists, and therefore colonization was one good way to bring civilization to these people. So maybe, hopefully, one day they can catch up, okay, with the colonists. Wow, that's somehow glorifying colonialism or colonization. But that was also a very important justification. You may call it in global politics or in global power struggle, okay, that time was being used, okay, in this way to justify any forms of political or military aggression, okay, from one group of people against another. Okay, postmodern time. That's another way. If you're interested more, if you want me to talk more about the postmodern, I think I'm more than happy to do so. But today, let's contextualize it with time first. Okay, what happened here? Like, okay, it will be an interesting starting point, okay, especially to talk about the time of hours. Because earlier, okay, even like I just told you, okay, it seems like time has its own unit. But from our day-to-day experience, especially in the city, in a highly consumerist society like Hong Kong, how do we tell time? I think one important thing, let's see if you agree with me, I think products are a very important thing for us to tell time. So we are not unified under time. We are more unified under different kinds of products. Just like our more going experience. I'm not so sure, did I mention that in the previous video? How do we know there's a change in the season, a change in festivals, okay, on and on throughout the year? For me, for quite some time, thanks to the change in the window decoration of shops, thanks to the change in the interior decorations of different malls in Hong Kong, I realized, Mother's Day is coming. Chinese New Year is coming. Christmas is coming. Father's Day is coming. Easter is coming. Not so sure if now that gives us a very interesting, good opportunity for us to reflect upon our identification with products as a time-telling device, because now I'm not so sure how many of you still go regularly to shopping malls. I try not to do that, especially the popular ones, because there will be many people around. Yeah. So if you remember that kind of experience, then it's not difficult to understand the so-called postmodern time, because partly time has been used or time has been installed in the advancement of consumerism or in product culture or in different kinds of even like so-called like buying and selling activities together. So time has become totally commercialized in a way. So partly we can understand postmodern time in this way. You may argue, okay, even at some point, okay, that's why some people say postmodern time is by itself a big contradiction. Reason for that, very easy. Okay, what tells postmodern time is simply the diminishment of time in both cultural form and everyday life, because we don't need time, we just need products, right? products tells us what kind of periods we are going through, what kind of seasons we are going through. So are we talking about time or are we talking about products? Or both has been, that's why they call it the diminishment of time, or time has been replaced, okay, for other forms of things. Somehow even worse, how do we tell history? Okay, I'm not talking about Chinese history, Hong Kong history. Let's talk about personal history. How many phones have you changed ever since you gained the right to own a phone? Now, while we are using these products to recount our life stories, are we talking about time or are we talking about the change in products? From maybe iPhone 3, iPhone 4, iPhone 5, all the way to iPhone, is it iPhone 3? Or iPhone 1, I forgot, sorry. Or even up to these days, iPhone 11 Pro. Okay. Now, very likely when we tell our own personal stories, now, which is a form of narrative, are we still narrating ourselves or are we narrating our possessions, narrating all the products that we owned at some point in our life? Now, if you understand that, then you understand what it means by the diminishment of time. Okay, so are we talking about time or are we talking, now I'm just using products as an example. Okay, all the places you've been to, okay, don't forget tourism is a kind of consumption. Yeah, on and on. Yeah, how many pairs of Adidas you've got, okay, ever since you become an adult, okay, in your lifetime. Now, those were the things, okay, we like to recount so much. How many times we use our dining experiences, we use our shopping experiences, we use our movie going experiences, drinking experiences, or whatever, hangout, clubbing experiences as a way to tell our life stories. If that's the case, then you even understand what it means to be the diminishment of time under postmodernism. Okay, and because of that, I changed the course reading from the original one, and I found this one from Frederick Jameson. This article, highly interesting to read. Okay, simply echo the end of temporality. If you read this one with Paul Ricoeur narrative time, it feels like they both are debating, even though these two critics, they didn't share the same time and space together. But then it felt up to a certain point they were debating. So that's why I picked this one for you. Also here already. Yep. Yep, this one. Yeah, right here. So download and read it, and please don't miss it. Kind of cool, this article, I think. Okay, so from postmodern time, you have a set reading, so that you may take a look later on. And from another also expert, okay, in postmodernity, by the name of David Harvey. I'm sure you heard of him a lot, okay. He also gave us the idea of so-called time-space compression. Because of so-called advanced capitalism, what we need most would be like a certain time and space compression. Okay, that these two things goes hand in hand, side by side together. Partly because time and space now becomes more like a capitalist meaning, because the shorter the time we need, the smaller the space we need, while we can maintain a certain high level of profit, it now becomes a golden principle. Okay, in the accumulation of profit under late capitalism or so-called advanced capitalism together. So he dates back to from the 1960s and the so-called Ford disk assembly line production. Okay, he used an example, the so-called flexible accumulation. So partly it's a kind of labor management, okay, because now we like to talk about outsourcing and subcontracting. By doing so, it reduced production time and it reduced turnover time, and therefore exchange and consumption accelerate in turn. Quite true. If you pay attention to the change of products, I think every season, every time you see products keep changing in a much shorter time span than the days of our parents or than the days of our grandparents. Because the more often they change, the more easier for you to keep buying. I think for you, H&M is a very good example. they call it fast fashion, right? Why fast fashion? Because partly the price is not too expensive, affordable, right? H&M to many of us here. And by changing the style, okay, like in a much faster pace, okay, it could also help to encourage you to buy more. And that's why even many fashion line, you notice they are not following the 4 seasons. In between, they keep changing, giving us new products, because by doing so, you will follow suit, and then you will spend more, and then you will consume more. Yeah. Yeah, I think time-space compression for us, think of H&M. That would be a very good example. Zara would be a little bit far-fetched, right? Zara, I think to some of us, that may be considered to be expensive, right? Uniqlo, I don't sense Uniqlo to be that kind of line, because I think Uniqlo is fairly, I'm thinking brand names that you all are familiar with. I think Uniqlo more basic casual one, right? Yeah. You don't go to Uniqlo to buy, maybe you do. Well, anyway, tell me later. I'm just an old guy, but I'm imagining how different brands, like, because they mean one thing to you doesn't mean they mean the same thing. But it means one thing to me doesn't mean it means the same thing to you also. Yeah. Anyway, H&M, I think by now, okay, it's a very good example of time-space compression. Okay. So now what happened? Now, okay, and the so-called time, postmodern time from Harvey. So everything becomes a temporary contract, which is true. What it shows us will be volatility, ephemerality, instantaneity, disposability. Okay, these four are what Harvey, highlight as the key characteristics of postmodern time. Everything can be volatile, everything can be ephemeral, everything can be just instant. Okay, everything can be disposed too. All the way together. Because by doing so, it shortens the consumption of time, and by shortens the consumption of time, you need more consumption in return. Therefore, for the accumulation of profit under late capitalism, this is a good thing. Yes, so this is the idea here. Okay, another good landmarks, if you're interested in postmodern time, would be this book, Chronogisms. Okay, in this book, what happened here? Again, again, the writer gave us a very interesting recount of the change in time. What tells us like here would be, I think she would be, you may find her work to be even more in line with our day-to-day life, because like these days, what happened would be, she took our attention to the so-called media-driven culture. Okay, and that becomes a kind of temporal experience. Now, if you are interested in so-called media-driven culture, I think starting from watching TV, which is a very old thing to you, TV used to be a very important thing to help us tell time. Yeah, maybe you don't sense much because you're not the TV generation. Go home, talk to your mom, talk to your father, or even talk to your grandparents. Or if you're interested, from time to time, just still switch on TV. I think they're still using the same formula. For instance, early in the morning, typical TV news reporting, and then a little bit of finance, and then usually after 9, 10 o'clock, I'm talking about TVB. Hope you don't mind. Check TVB schedule. I think it's still the same these days. So early in the morning, we all wake up now because it concerns with a typical capitalistic work routine of our life. So yeah, 7, 8 o'clock, we all wake up, brush up, assume you're in business, you want to watch some news, and then when the market starts, kind of stock market, I'm talking about around starting at 9 something. Okay, before that they have analysis, and then they have forecasts, and then usually in between they will die down a little bit, right? Around 9 something, 10 to afternoon, you see 2 hours empty, and those time usually reserved for elderly people. Yes, I think these days the same. That 2 hours reserved for elderly people. So they have shows teaching elderly people how to do exercises, how to keep fit, on, and then noontime, and then news reporting again, and then normally it comes back to some shows. Okay, and some of these shows are more reserved for housewife, which I'm not so sure this particular class still exists in Hong Kong. I'm sure there are still some. Okay, so they call it the housewife prime time. That's why in the shows you notice like many of the shows they teach a housewife how to cook dinner, how to clean up the house. Okay, something fairly much domestic driven in a way. So all the information, everything. You and I, because likely we are in school or we are out working, so I don't think we will be at home watching TV. Of course, you may argue with me. You have your handphones, you have your smartphones, you can watch TV, okay, all day long. But how often you watch TV with your smartphone? I think you'll be watching you'll be checking Instagram or doing, watching YouTube more often than other things. Now, YouTube is a very good way because it even helps us to detemporalize. Okay, detemporalize our exposure to media. Our smartphones is a very interesting invention because if we pay attention to how we use smartphones, no timeline for us anymore. Anytime you want to watch anything, Jamie Oliver, you don't have to wait till a certain time until it comes out. Look at Netflix, look at HBO on demand, all these different things. What do they have in common? They detemporalize our watching, viewing behavior. Okay, sorry, I'm going too fast again. Back to TVB example. So afternoon comes, okay, so noon to 2 p.m. around that will be the so-called domestic time. And then afterwards, usually like 3, 4, 5 p.m., that kind of time will be children's time because usually school kids, okay, will be released from school and then now home, they may want to watch some TV. So you start to see education channels being pops up, and then sometime before like 5, 6 p.m., okay, around that time you start to see maybe they play some old drama. Okay, so that's one way to buy time until another prime news reporting period, which happens around 6:30 to 7:30, and then afterwards the three more. There will be drama series, right? Usually 3 because that was the time people get home, have dinner, okay, on, and they spend the time together at home watching TV. Now, those were very old traditional TV time scheme. Okay, nowadays, if we goes back to our handphone experience, what makes it interesting would be it helps to detemporalize our timeline. It helps to detemporalize our watching behavior. So anytime we want to watch, press a button, here you go. Okay, so that's why you can take it like, even from our handphones, our smartphones, yes, already that's a very different approach to time. Okay, so therefore, what happened now? Everything is complexity. One time we can watch so many things, right? Contingency, ad hoc. I want HBO on demand. I press the button. I don't like it. I change it. I go back to Netflix. Netflix, there will be so many different channels, right? I want to watch this one. Maybe 5 minutes later, I feel boring, and then I change it and then watch another. Now everything contingent, all up to me, all ad hoc, and then most important will be here. And then non-linearity of time. Who tells you time has to go on this way from 6 a.m. all the way up to 9 p.m. at night? No. Right, with our handphones especially, okay, the TVB schedule doesn't work on us. It used to be one good way to govern us. Okay, shall I speak a little bit more here? Yeah, maybe. If you notice why we had TVB, anybody knows the answer? Anyone? If you notice, TVB as a major TV channel was only somehow, how to say, in surface, right after the 1967 riots. Yes. Before that, I'm not saying there were no TV channels, but the colonial government didn't pay much attention. But one good way to use media as a way to sort of control our time, because ask yourself, if you're working for the government, now you have typical TV channels asking people to go home, watch TV after work. If people are home watching TV after work, which also means one good thing, they are not loitering on the streets. If they are not loitering on the streets, what's that mean? Social stability. That's why afterwards, very soon you have the V show, okay, which happens like for many, many years. You have the late night V show on TVB channel, and then very soon they have the first Miss Hong Kong Beauty Contest. I think that was 1970 something. So those were the post-riot days. Then the colonial government start to pay serious attention to media as a way to sort of like by giving us different programs, different things to watch throughout the day. It also helps to regulate our daily life. So media, power, time, okay, and routine. Okay, these four things are always going hand in hand together. Of course, you may counter argue, saying like it doesn't work anymore. Okay, look at the political activism that we have been observing in the last couple years in Hong Kong. Quite true. How many of you give up protests just simply want to go home and watch TV? No need, right? Because your handphones are with you. And most likely, TV to many of you, I think they lose their traditional magic already. At least it's not something that could really like saying pull you back home, sit down properly because you don't want to miss any important episode. You don't want to miss the ending of a very nice TV drama, or you don't want to miss the so-called the final of Miss Hong Kong Beauty Contest. Who was the champion last year? I'm sorry, no idea for me. Okay, maybe some of you can tell me, please let me know. I have no idea. So, you know, not just you, even my generation, the TV has lost its magic upon us. But that being said, now you understand what it means by complexity, contingency, and most important, non-linearity. Yes. So therefore, by looking at that, now what has been replaced? So they are not talking about more like the psychological experience of time, but now is more like the fragmented logics. Because why is it a fragmented logics of time? Fragmented means like just like all these TV shows, okay, all these media-driven products. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't even have a certain time limit. You press the button. Well, you pay properly. Sometimes you don't even pay. You can watch it anytime you want. Okay, as long as you want to watch it. Okay, so you may call it like that's more like the heyday of media consumerism as being manifested through the popularity of smartphones. Okay, because but by doing so, it also breaks the very linear logic of time together. And therefore, okay, for heists, okay, we start to see defamiliarization and we start to see so-called critical distance. And therefore, these days, we also always want to tell people like, okay, if people are not with us, we call them they're living in a parallel universe. Because quite true, nowadays we have multiple alternative temporalities. You see time this way, sorry, I could see time the other. Okay, your time goes on this way, maybe my time goes on in a different way. You fill in your time with your time telling your life story, the different kinds of products. I fill up my life story with different kinds of products, different kinds of media exposure. Now, that's we could understand as multiple alternative temporalities. Yep, one more thing to go. For those of you who are even more interested in finance, this article is quite interesting here. I think this from this review. If you're interested, just look it up and then download this one. Okay, say some of you, I'm not so sure if you invest, but in Hong Kong, no matter you like it or not, we have to invest because our MPF. If you don't have an MPF, no problem. Talk to your parents. Okay, so by and large, okay, the government make us all investors. Okay, but whether or not we all make money, I doubt it, especially the market these days. So with finance, okay, give us a totally different kinds of temporal experience too. Because most likely what the finance do is always like the action we take today will always affect our future. Look at insurance policy. Look at all these investment policies. No matter what things they ask you to buy, they always keep telling you, your action now will always determine the gains in the future. But then they assume one thing, any action you take will only guarantee you get certain gains. Now, very important, gains in the future. So therefore, quite interesting. Now, from this article, the writer, Robin Blackburn, okay, really criticized the idea that, okay, so what they possibly do is we always want to give certain speculation that bring the future into the present, which we believe it can be assessed, managed, or even more thoroughly monetized in a way. Now, this is the key principle in the temporal experience, having with finance, okay, having dominated, okay, our way of life in Hong Kong, even in the rest of the capitalist world. So therefore, now from him, we start to see another thing. Financial instrument replace the duration of long-term investment. So with volatile temporalities of immediacy and instantaneity, now same thing. I don't want to wait 10 years to make my gain. I want to make it now. Okay, of course, some policy we tell you, fine, we can do that, but then the risk will be higher. And to him, these temporalities quite contradictorily abolish the very idea of the future. So everything has to come here now. Okay, I want to see it. I want to foresee it, guarantee like 5 years later, I could make 10% gain in my portfolio. But how could you make such guarantee? Okay, but then even like the future has to be blended into the present to convince you by giving up certain money, by putting it down in a certain account, in 5 years, you will make another 10, 15% gain in the future. But is that a future? Nobody knows. Now, that's Robert Blackburn's critique against the ubiquity of financial service in our way of life these days. And that can be understood as a form of postmodern time. Okay, 2 more brainstorming questions for you based on all different kinds of temporalities that we have come across by now. So the 2 questions, I'll leave it to you, will be, okay, could be fairly useful for paper 2, I think, for the second paper, but, well, anyway, still useful if you're interested in time and narrative. Alongside different forms of time and temporalities, how is the idea of narrative being challenged in contemporary arts and literature? Now, so we notice like linear narration not working anymore because it doesn't have to cope with all these different kinds of temporal experiences. But that being said, okay, how is it being actually challenged? Later on, we will talk more about it from psychoanalysis, okay, post-colonialism, as well as other forms of narrative theories, okay, which I think starting next week, one by one, I'll go through that with you. But then by now, it would be good for you to have a little kickstart. Okay, then exactly how is narrative being challenged now with the availability of different kinds of temporal experiences? Okay, second question. If the innate linearity of narration is no longer held valid and or universal, then what should narration become and how should it cater for different and at times contrasting political, cultural, and academic stances? These days, it seems to be, especially the last one, contrasting political, cultural, and academic stances. Okay, it seems like even the way we tell time can be fighting with one another. How we tell time can now be translated into a full-blown power struggle between different groups of people. So this is something I think narration, okay, or even within narrative theory, they have to cope with. Okay, now in the very intensifying global political, how to say, well, struggles among different nations, among different people, but around the world. Yep. So this is all I want to share with you in this particular PowerPoint. And yeah, once again, a couple things you need to do, okay, which I've highlighted here. So yeah, the tutorial free. I need a short feedback from you, and hope you have seen this video about the term paper briefing. And yeah, the 4 short stories here, please choose one for your paper 1. And it sounds like not all of you are aware of the change in the due date. So I just emphasize here once again. Yeah, I've changed it ever since they stopped classes. So just in case you haven't paid attention to this document, the paper one, the due date will be 8th of April, which I think you still have a couple more weeks to go. And then the final one, paper due, will be due 15th of May 2020. So don't worry. So don't even look at those due dates in the original teaching plan. I've changed them completely to deal with the situation we are now all facing in Hong Kong. Okay, so this is all I want to share with you now. And well, as usual, take good care of yourself and the people around you. I'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.